experiences as an eager crusader in Iraq, fighting the infidel. Every night they'd go back to their base and clap hands and praise Jesus, prepare for the next day's crusading. But he says one day he encountered a woman in Iraq, temperatures a lot higher than the temperatures in South Ken, wearing a niqab, reading the Quran. This goes into his book. And it seems to be that prompts his reflections about religion. And of course, because he has this myth that the founding fathers were somehow Christian, and imagined that the United States would be some sort of Christian thing, even though the founding fathers and the Plymouth pioneers left Europe because of Europe's theocratic ways and they wanted religious liberty, but that's not the story that's in the White House at the moment, decided that, well, maybe he'd better be Catholic. So at the end of the day, he goes back and they're praising Jesus again, and the female troopers are dressed in whatever they feel like dressing in. The seriousness, the eminence of the commitment of the Muslim woman who, despite the intemperate weather, is not going to make compromises and is not going to trigger that electrical storm in the frontal cortex of passing males, made a difference to him and is affecting global politics. He made the wrong choice, the wrong decision. He's even in an argument with the Pope at the moment because he thinks the Pope isn't really Catholic enough. A lot of converts are like that. But yes, the power, the witness of the Muslim woman who won't compromise and who provokes a storm of self-questioning in the minds of every passerby. Instead of a hormonal rush, the passing male thinks, well, she's making a big sacrifice. What is this God, this Allah, that has made her do this? And the politicians get into a tizzy, and they try to ban it or to punish it or to imprison the fathers who they think are imposing it upon French Muslim girls, and they can't figure it out, especially in France, the land of Givenchy and chic and the Champs-Élysées, and it's the land of let it all hang out. That's where they seem to be most phobic and panicky about it. It's become a political crisis. But the reflection is an important one, and the witness is critical. And it reminds us that whether we like it or not, we are the visible sign, the most visible sign of difference, of otherness, of the idea of self-transcendence that Sheikh Hamza was just telling us about, going against the personal desire to be cool in the two senses of the word in order to be dignified, to be faithful, to be authentic, to be one's higher self rather than one's lower self. Whether we like it or not, we are the sign of that. And those down the centuries of Islam who have seen the Ummah not just as a kind of identity or a club or a people, but as a healing, shifa'un wa rahmah, and a mercy, which is what the Quran says that it is and is administering to humanity. Those who are physicians of hearts have always seen everything in the Sharia as being there in order to raise us up to something that will actually give us ease and give us life. Yad'ukum lima yuhyikum, give you real life. Not the kind of computational life that ends up in a kind of hijrah into a cyberspace of doom scrolling mediated by bots that are there to line the pockets of undeserving tech barons, but real life. You're in the life sciences. What is this mystery of life? No doubt you've had those lectures. When did life begin? Is there life beyond the solar system, etc., etc.? We spend billions trying to determine where it is or what it might be, and the science fiction movie industry is predicated on what the monster might look like when it finally gets its clutches on poor old Sigourney Weaver, and it's part of our culture. Life still interests us because we know there is an enigma there. Despite all of the breakthroughs in human thought and human accomplishment and in technology, we're still baffled by the important questions that we've been baffled by since the time of Plato, Aristotle, and before. The big questions that really confront us from the very moment that we slither forth from our mothers who are gasping in this experience of conveying the chain of life forward in time. And we look around and of course we burst into tears because this is very unlikely, strange. The baby thinks, this is weird. The big mystery, what's going on? It looks impossible, it's extremely humorously improbable. Time and space and doggies in the park and daddy coming home from work, and it's all unbelievable, but empirically it's there. That's the beginning of humanity, really, in that unlike the other species, which are in their fitra given to knowledge of reality, human beings have to work it out, and we're put in this particularly strange environment. Dunya. The Quran is always urging us to look and to have tafakkur. وَيَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. They think about the creation of the heavens and the earth, but not just analytically and additively, but qualitatively and philosophically and deeply. What on earth is going on? If I can find some kind of answer, everything else in my life will change. I'll probably be a lot happier if I know the meaning of life. And that's been the great project of humanity, and of those who are the healers of hearts down the centuries have known that human beings are only truly at rest and truly themselves if they know what's going on. There seems to be an inverse relationship between technical prowess and a sense that we know what's going on. 100,000 years ago, everybody knew what the meaning of life was, and that there were spirits in every bird and every tree, and that the shaman of the village could explain things if it wasn't quite clear. The idea it might be a mystery was not understood by everyone. They certainly knew. It's normal for humanity to know what's going on. It's only in our generation that we're really not quite sure, that we're perplexed, that the baby's cry is there in the adult as well. That's one reason why we have the anxiety pandemic and the depression pandemic and this dysfunction, because we have everything except the master signifier, the explanation. What on earth is going on? Much of modern culture is there either to convince us that what's really interesting is that actually nothing's going on, a kind of nihilism. And that's one of the signs of our late modernity. Toddle along the Thames, short distance, you will find glaring at each other across the river, there is Tate Britain and Tate Modern. It's a good way of introducing young people and your children to the paradoxes and the despair of modernity. You go into Tate Britain and there is Turner with his majestic sense of the depth of the miracle of being. There are the Pre-Raphaelites with their sense of the luminosity of human beauty and the chivalric troubadour values and redolent with meaning, looking at the mystery of beauty and the world and of gender and of childhood and of colour and saying, yes, this is meaningful. And then you go across the river to Tate Modern, and then you see Damien Hirst, and then you see Tracy Emin and the rest of them, and everything has fallen apart. The 19th century focus on the indicativity of beauty finally collapsed within about 30 years, and what we have nowadays is a celebration or a commemoration or a kind of grim enjoyment of the interesting fact of nothing being true. The centre of Tate Modern, if you've been there, there's an enormous kind of void, used to be some kind of turbine hall, and it almost sucks you into it. And that is almost a kind of symbolic, deliberate representation of what modern culture is doing. It's really, really interesting that nothing means anything. Intuitively, from babyhood, we think there must be something going on. This is very unlikely. What is the explanation? Late modernity says it's really interesting that there is nothing in that void where the Christian God used to be. There is only a kind of vortex, a fascinating vertigo that grabs you as you stand in front of Damien Hirst and think, wow, he's saying that nothing is true. There are no values. There's no life after death. There is only decomposition and the dead sheep, and that is itself quite interesting. It gets a little bit repetitive once you've worked your way through all of those galleries and seen all of the evocations of chaos and ugliness and meaninglessness, and you think, well, one of those would probably have been enough. But this is where we are as a species. more and more technique, less and less certainty, and the human being is not really designed for that. You could say that the great physicians of the ages, theologians as well as medics, and in the Islamic context usually they were the same kind of person. Great thinkers were often great medics as well. Avicenna, maybe the best known of all, a court physician, but also the great interpreter of philosophy in his day, who would go along to the mosque to pray when he couldn't crack a syllogism or work out a logical problem. He saw himself as part of the Ummah, have all tried to heal human beings at the deepest level, which is the level that provokes the baby's cry and our sense of tearfulness in the face of what might turn out to be a completely brutal and meaningless cosmos, the terrible idea that death alone is true, which is Heidegger's idea. Death alone gives meaning to our lives because that's the only real certainty. Everything else is open to deconstruction, but not death. So the true physician of the hearts is the one who finds a way to console the crying human soul with the reclamation of what human beings have always known as the most important thing, the master signifier. And we know that that master signifier has manifested itself in many ways and in very many wrong ways. Not everything that takes place in the rainforest of untouched Upper New Guinea is something that you would be at ease with. Some of primordial religion is distorted, sacrifice-based, terrifying, aggressive, not kind to women, of course. When we say that Islam is the religion of the fitra, and fitra is this rich concept, difficult to define, which has something to do with nature, something to do with what's normal to us, and we know that there is a primordiality about Islam. We're not talking about going back to the lifestyle of Northern Australia 1,000 years ago. Talking about something more complex, but something that makes sense even in the context of secular modern therapies. Freud was probably the first to try and attempt a general explanation of why so many wealthy women in 19th century Vienna seemed to be crazy. The neurosis, the hysteria, what was going wrong when they were rich, middle-class beneficiaries of a great empire. Why did they seem to be so sorrowful? And it links with the anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss's idea that anthropology is actually an anthropology, because the more he studied the modernizing of traditional peoples, the more he saw that they became miserable. The untouched tribes are pretty happy. And you can see this today if you go to primordial parts of the world, parts of Africa where they haven't been spoilt too much by smartphones. In the village, nobody has a smartphone, but everybody is smiling. I've been to Black Africa and everybody is happy there. Women grinding the corn and the men sitting around watching the women grinding the corn. It's not a very equal world. Everybody is smiling. The kids are smiling. Nobody's got much to wear, but it's cheerful. And then you get back on the plane and you get on the tube from Heathrow and everybody looks like, an asteroid impact is imminent. That kind of Western face. We have everything, but despair. Something's gone wrong. So Freud looked at that. His explanation is a kind of biomedical one. He was against religion. His thought was that the human brain last adapted to a kind of late Pleistocene hunter-gatherer survival fitness environment, and to the extent that modernity takes us away from those conditions for which the brain is adapted, we're going to feel uncomfortable and alienated and sad. What's the solution? He didn't really have one. His personal solution was to take a lot of cocaine. We now know that. Not necessarily recommended. But we are, because of our modernity, sick in the deepest sense. And that's a secular as well as a sort of religious, sermonizing diagnosis. And more recent paleoanthropologists, people like Desmond Morris, Jared Diamond and others, that really have much to do with religion, can see that we are in a state of profound unease and sickness and alienation because our brains are being forced to do things that they're not designed for. Gender is an important aspect of this. Why is there so much gender dysfunction, discomfort, anxiety, extremism? Why is there hormonal decline across the developed world? Something is deeply wrong. Why are people not having babies, which is the most fundamental sign of the failure of a species? Something is dysfunctional. Probably because we've lost sight of the basic fact that for 99% of the history of our species, the woman was at the back of the cave with the babies, the man was at the front of the cave trying to keep the tiger out. That's how the division of labor began. Her hips grew because the baby's brain is large. She couldn't run as fast as the male, and therefore he became the hunter-gatherer warrior. And the feminists are fidgety about this. This is just a fact of human development. And now we are moving away from that, and we're told, just be yourself. Hamza was good on this. Be yourself. Discover yourself. Be authentic. But nobody any longer can tell you what the self is. And any traditional religion will tell you, like the Buddhists, that the self isn't really there. You try and assess yourself in order to be yourself. What do you discover? Well, a kind of random collocation of impulses and half-processed memories and anxieties, and it's not actually very pretty if you engage in what we call muhasaba. What really is the self? Behind that miasma of cobwebby, half-created conceptions and anxieties and egotisms, there is something extraordinary, the ruh, which if you move apart the cobwebs, all the traditions tell us is shining, and to which it seems primordial societies often had access. But that's gone now, and when they say be yourself, dress to please yourself, it's all about that kind of miasma of mess that is on the surface, that when you think about it, and it's often quite depressing to do so, it turns out not to be very much. It's not worth being yourself when you think about what the self is, but the religions are all telling you, you can grow into something that is majestic, that to which the angels bow down. Angels are not going to bow down to the self that is doom-scrolling, not worth it. But the ruh, which is the light of truth, al-haq, that's how the angels bow down to Adam, which seems to be, from a Tawheed perspective, unacceptable. But it's in the Quran. The Lord said, bow down to Adam. فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسِ. They bowed down except Iblis. So the pride that says, no, we won't accept the divine light in human beings, the discovery of which is the basis of all human societies and of all human happiness and health, not bowing down to that and instead saying, well, I'm that cobwebby, dusty thing that I call myself that is pleased by social media likes. Well, if you're saying it's that rather than that with a capital T, then you're with Iblis and the fiery principle that is never satisfied with anything and that is full of deadly sins and envy and retaliation, and that's what you will become. So the deep health, which is a term that some 19th century dissident philosophers who are looking at the decline of human beings is anthropology. More stuff, less substance, we're talking about. Nietzsche has this idea of the great health. We are truly ourselves, not when we are bourgeois German managers of provincial railways who go to church, and no, we are ourselves when we are somehow in continuity with the ancient fitri normality of the species, which means an unashamed attachment to what gender is clearly supposed to be, which means heroism, which means sacrifice, which means ritual, which means a deep engagement with the mysterium of nature. You can read it in his book, The Birth of Tragedy, and elsewhere. Nietzsche is kind of fun because for us, a short attention span moderns, he's always changing the subject. Every paragraph is something disconnected, aphoristic approach, quite accessible. He saw it quite clearly, but of course he had no access to a sacred tradition. He really, really, really didn't like the church. So he ended up going mad. He knew what we needed. He's very articulate. People like Iqbal, one of Iqbal's great achievements is that he read Nietzsche, he knew German, and he understood. He said Nietzsche is like a majdoob. He's using Rumi's Sufi terminology. He's attracted. He knows that there is a deep miracle in existence, and he knows that our health comes about when we are oriented towards it and ritualistically responding to it, but it's not going to find that in the Lutheran Church in Saxony. No, he hates them. Hypocritical, pietistic, moralizing, anti-sensual, boring pastors. Certainly not. And where can he find it? He says some positive things about Islam, but he never really has access to that, so he does end up just going off his head. He takes modernity, you could say, to its logical conclusion, which is madness. Foucault later on talks about this madness as being the consequence of being mentally healthy and knowing what you need but not having access to it, because modernity is so banal and mediocre but comfortable. So, yeah, the deep health. How are we to reconnect to what has always been indispensable to the proper functioning of human morality and society and the family and the brain and everything, that which we no longer have? What's the solution there? The good news is that we don't, as Muslims, believe that the fault lies with some sin committed by Adam and Eve. That's a kind of fairly repulsive traditional attitude common amongst some believers of what seems to be the implication of the biblical text as understood by St. Paul, but the idea that we're all broken because of what some ancestor did. He ate an apple, not really commensurate with our idea of Ar-Rahman, a loving God. And one of the things that we do on the Hajj, of course, is to go to the plain of Arafat, and the Hajj is probably the greatest therapeutic practice I've ever seen. If you've done it, just take a look at what it does to people who are with you. It's very moving. I once used to live in Saudi Arabia, and I knew this German lawyer, a very secular person, who was making a killing in a key law firm in Jeddah, but because he'd married a nominally Muslim woman, he converted and he had Muslim in his iqamah, so he said, I'll go and do the Hajj. Oh, yeah, I will go do the Hajj this year. Yeah, I will take my camera. He had the right to do that. So he went for his Hajj. He came back. His secular wife was horrified. He was praying 5 times a day. He had prayer beads. He was kind of in another space. And you see a lot of that. It's one of the best things you can learn when you go on Hajj. If you're going with a group, see how people interact with each other on the crowded bus as it goes up to Mecca. And then 4 days later, they'll be kind of coughing and dusty, and it's hard work, on the same bus coming back. And see how they change. It is very remarkable how they look after each other, and have you got enough water, and auntie, and they are changed. That's real therapy. The Hajj as a healing, as you would expect from the religion that says it's rahmah, or shifa, mercy and healing. But one of the things that we do on the Hajj, and everything there has a very profound meaning. There's a very beautiful book by a French Muslim, Charles-André Gillis, who sadly died last year, called The Initiatic Doctrine of the Pilgrimage to the House of Allah. And Arafat is the place which we associated with God drawing the line under original sin. The God of mercy couldn't punish Adam's descendants for something that a forefather had done. That's really a horrible idea when you think about it. And we are born pure, innocent, inwardly healthy, in the fitrah. And when we cry, when we see the weirdness, that's also from the fitrah. The crying is part of our sense of exile from our original home. The day of Alastu bi Rabbikum, when everybody was together in a kind of loving unity, a celebration. Persian poets call it Bezmi Alas, the party of the primordial covenant. How could humanity not be ecstatic when it's all sinless, lined up in front of the divine beauty together? Delight, pure ecstasy. And human ecstasy and joy in its true sense on earth, in the state of being in love, for instance, appreciating beauty, a good prayer is a kind of fragrance from that original ecstasy, and our poets have always been very clear about that. And the healing that comes about from Arafat is the knowledge, and that's, if you've been to Arafat and you wander around and you see people in their tents praying, and okay, there's some tents that have the ice cream machine, and that's not perhaps what one imagines of a holy practice, and then I pass another tent. Everybody in the tent in their ihram is sitting watching a television. What are they watching? They're watching the Hajj on television. You have to be non-judgmental, and that's part of the exercise. And you see people praying and people crying and children quiet, and it's very extraordinary. Even though on Arafat nothing's going on, you're just sitting or standing and praying, and people are remembering God's grace in forgiving Adam and the restoration of healing, and they're also anticipating the final gathering when everybody comes together again, and it's not quite so easy because some people have remembered and some people have chosen to forget, and some are out of luck, and the cemetery is closed, and Arafat is the recollection of the final standing, and you see the perfect beauty and the symmetry of the rituals and how deeply people absorb it and are changed by it and start weeping and are different when they come home, and you realize this is very profound spiritual alchemy that is being done. Even if people don't know the theory and they've got no idea what the tawaf is and the sa'i is, and you go here and you throw this stone, and it's not like anything else in religion, but it's all God's hospital. And we know, therefore, that we are born with that primordial cry of nostalgia. Baby says, not back to the womb, but back to the Bazmi Alast, the immemorial, the day of Alastu bi Rabbikum. And we all have that cry, and that's the basis for our sickness. And even many of our physical sicknesses come from not being able to deal with that properly. When people become alcoholics, or they have a bad diet, or they don't take enough exercise, or they neglect themselves. And a lot of the stuff that you see in A&E is avoidable because of human beings not being in tune with what's natural and normal for themselves, and their disquiet looks for the false consolation of pharmaceuticals or laziness or some other thing that isn't natural to us. So the physicians of Islam historically, whether or not they have been branded as doctors, and this is a very kind of modern Hippocratic oath type caste that is separated from everybody else, but historically it was not so clearly differentiated, has to relate to the fact that the Holy Prophet ﷺ came really as a physician for his people. Rumi says, هذا أديبي هذا حبيبي هذا طبيبي هذا شفائي, talking about the Holy Prophet in Arabic for a change. This is my teacher, this is my friend, this is my physician, this is my cure. And traditional Muslims are perfectly aware of how the contemplation of and the awareness of the prophetic presence is healing. Another Hijazi experience. Talk to anybody who's been to Medina. What's the worst thing about going to Medina? They always say leaving. I felt so guilty. Can I stay another day? Can I negotiate? It's all on an app nowadays, and who knows how you get an extra day at the end of Hajj. It's a screaming nightmare. It's not as easy as it used to be. But everybody thinks, it's really wrong to leave. And they may not be able to articulate it, but there's something there which we know is profoundly healing. And you see the old guys from Afghanistan and so forth, as they move away from the haram, walking backwards. Maybe some of you have seen that. They don't want to turn their backs on the Holy Prophet, and that's because they know what they're getting. Yeah. So the Holy Prophet as the ultimate physician, the ultimate healer. And where is that today? Nietzsche never found him. The West lacks that. And that's why you get on the London Underground this sad display of human confusion. Nobody has a sunnah, nobody knows how to be, nobody knows how to link body and soul. All of the things that human beings used to have and used to need are vanished, but people know that they need it. And when somebody like J.D. Vance, with his American Crusader ego, sees the Iraqi woman with her Quran and her niqab on the day when the temperature is pushing 50, and he thinks, these people are serious, it still has an impact. So to bring things to the present, how can this healing that we experience when in a decent and non-egotistical and open-hearted and compassionate understanding of our tradition spread to others, to our neighbours? Well, My conviction is that probably you medics are going to be better at doing it than we academics. We write so many footnotes and use so many strange words that the real world pays very little attention to us, because to get preferment you have to play that game. We're more or less priced out of the market. But you people, you see everybody, insofar as everybody is an incarnated human being. Everybody has those aches and pains. And the storm that is on the horizon at the moment as part of the modern disequilibrium and dissatisfaction and who am I and what is my identity and what's going on and why is modernity not pleasing me, is the far right. Those dark clouds on the horizon everywhere in Europe, enlightened Europe, cradle of enlightenment, etc. The far right, the biggest party in most Western European countries now, and in Eastern Europe, more or less in charge. And they're talking about ourselves. They're not talking about the Jews any longer. They're not really worried too much about the Africans. It's the Muslims, always the Muslims. And it's not, I suspect, academics who are going to be at the front line of pushing back against that manifestation of Europe's sickness. It's probably going to be people like yourselves. Because, after all, they're talking about immigration and Muslim immigration and remigration and send them back home. And but what do they do when, during the COVID pandemic, the Tommy Robinson supporter is in the plastic tent trying desperately to breathe, and he looks through the plastic tent and the nurse is in a hijab trying to save his life? Can he still quite be Islamophobic when he knows that the health service is absolutely dependent on immigration and upon Muslims above all? And at the biomedical campus in Cambridge, 20,000 people work there. It's a whole galaxy of people in white coats and in scrubs. You should go to the Friday prayers at Addenbrooke's. Impressive. I gave a khutbah there once. I turn up on time, there's like 3 guys there, and I think, really? And I start, alhamdulillah, rabbil alameen, I go through the motions. By the time I finish, it's completely packed out, because they're busy. They rush in with the stethoscopes and the documents and everything. They rush in, they say their prayers, they rush out again. Hundreds of people. That's a decisive and a successful and an irrefutable argument against the xenophobes. Do you really want them to go away? Do you really want the waiting lists to be twice as long? Do you really want all of those additional health services to be cut? None of them will say yes, particularly given the amount that some of those Farage voters drink. They really need the NHS. An unhealthy bunch. If you look at the Tommy Robinson rallies, you saw the images, 100,000 of them in Trafalgar Square. He was repeating the Lord's Prayer and they were praying after him. They probably never heard it before. They look like a pretty unhealthy bunch. They need you more than anybody. And if they're going to vote for a party that says, well, we'll send them off to Pakistan or wherever they come from, we care not. However, they're going to do that legally, they're going to be even sicker. They're going to wait 10 years for their hip replacement, screaming every time they get up to fiddle with the television or whatever it is that they still do. No, that's not going to happen. You are the best argument against the far-right maniacs. There's other sectors in which British Muslims are indispensable. A third of medium-sized businesses in London now are Muslim-owned. We're really important to the capital's economy, quite apart from our role in City of London, laundering and disguising various pots for various Middle Eastern autocrats. And we know that that's one of the things that we do with the offshore banking havens, Gibraltar, Isle of Man, Cayman Islands. No other country does that. Even the Swiss are a bit more discreet. But London, centre for global capital. You're really going to problematize all of that? I don't think so. So whenever they get into power, you are going to be an important argument, as well as the rest of the British Muslim economy, which is much more powerful and indispensable than anybody realizes. But there's other arguments as well, and part of the problem is that the leadership is more or less rubbish. for the Muslim community in this country. You watch Newsnight and they bring on the Muslim representative from some South Lancashire Council of Mosques or something, and you know you have to switch channels immediately because you're going to get really angry. The guy is going to say something outrageous. Happened in Cambridge recently at a debate, the Union Society. It's the usual kind of thing, is Islam a challenge to Western civilization, or the usual nonsense. And one of the Muslim speakers who'd been asked about domestic violence, he said, "You don't understand, our women, they like to be beaten. This is part of our culture. You have to respect our culture." And we thought, well, okay, we've lost that debate. A lot of our leaders are that clunky and that useless and that detached, and that is dangerous. It's not really the responsibility of medics to be muftis and leaders of Islam, but collectively, particularly when we're thinking of where to put our zakat and other charities, leadership training is going to be really important, which is one of the things that we do at Cambridge Muslim College, because when the crisis really hits, and when the skinheads are there in Downing Street, things are going to get difficult. They're already difficult in France. There's 300 Muslim women who, because of the niqab, never leave the home because it's illegal, they just stay at home. In Switzerland, minarets are prohibited by the constitution. Can you imagine? They're so much anxious about Muslims that they don't want to see mosques, and so in their constitution they say the construction of minarets is forbidden. So when that law came in, I sort of put on my Cambridge Dons mortarboard and sent a message to the Swiss Ministry of Justice to try and make sense of this. And I said, what happens if a church becomes a mosque? Does the spire get classified under Swiss law as a minaret? And in their kind of Swiss bankers' humorless way, they thought about this, and I got a response back saying, yes, it is a minaret under Swiss law and it must be demolished. So I teased them again. Next email. What happens if a Christian builds a minaret? It looks like a minaret in his back garden, and it's got everything and the crescent, and in Zurich or somewhere. Silence. A few days later, no, it's not a minaret. He is allowed to do this. And I have a bit more fun, and then I get bored. It's absurd. And eventually I think it will be defeated by that absurdity, but it is coming because they're hollow inside. They've lost their own tradition, they don't go to church any longer, there's no master narrative. And this new nationalism, I think, which is a reflection of the nihilism and the sadness of the loss of self, which they think they can solve by blaming people who look different to themselves, which is a bit desperate. There's no real philosophy behind it. I think is so shallow that eventually it will be an opportunity for Islam, and particularly those of you who are engaging at a kind of personal level with human beings. And obviously you can't be missionaries, but just to be yourselves, to maintain compassion, patience, to be good listeners, to go the extra mile with patience, doesn't be much more effective than being a dusty professor working away with old manuscripts in libraries. You can do a lot of good culturally and politically, as well as biomedically. So I'm waiting for the arm. Cautiously, I'm kind of optimistic because we are starting not just to be suppliant in the West. Oh, I've just arrived from some poor part of the world. Please, can I drive taxis for you? Please, please. In that rather craven way that we saw with so many Muslims who just simper with ecstasy when given the opportunity of being photographed next to the local MP. They're just desperate to please the white man. It's rather pathetic, undignified, unprophetic. New generation is more interesting, more interested, is aware of the drawbacks of this society, and medics are often better informed than most about the crisis that's going on. And Hamza mentioned the loneliness crisis, which is one of the worst medical crises and one of the hardest to resolve, and can play a vital role in exemplifying, not just through hijabs on the underground, but more generally, an authentic alternative. But we need to push back against this discourse of Islam as a problem. Muslims as violent. It's very boring. It's not actually true. We need to equip ourselves with some basic information. Fewer than 1% of violent deaths in Europe over the last 100 years were the work of Muslims. It's actually the same globally. The big conflicts are the result of Western-based secular or Christian ideologies. The big conflicts in today's world are Putin's holy war, and the Russian Orthodox Church has declared a holy war against Ukraine. 1 million people might have died. And the American-Israeli crusade, whatever it is, against Iran, that's causing mayhem but isn't really delivering very much for them. Muslims haven't invaded a Christian country since the 13th century, but they attack Iraq, they attack Libya, they attacked through the Zionist thing Palestine, they're now having a go at Iran. I was talking to a concerned liberal English lady and she said, why is it, you've talked about Islam, but why is it that an Afghan asylum seeker in Germany last week drove a van into a crowd? That was what she wanted to know. And I thought, well, a terrible thing. He's a mentally ill, failed asylum seeker who's done this ugly thing and injured some people. But what about the patriarch of Russia who has declared holy war and killed 1 million people? Is that Christian extremism? No, it's not, no, that's not terrorism. That's Jesus' love and mercy, and that's not Christianity, and that's how they get away with it. But we need to get away from this browbeaten mindset that somehow we're on the wrong side of morality. Simply not the case. Generally, Islam seems to be a success story, and the endless susurration of negativity from the media needs to be pushed back quite strongly, and we need to have some basic knowledge to do that. Last year, Pew published the largest ever survey of global religiosity. How do you measure that? Well, they did a very simple thing. They just went to every country in the world and they asked tens of thousands of people, do you pray every day? That was the measurement they came up with. And you can look at it for free on their website. 150 countries, the most religious, the least religious. And the most religious is Indonesia. 96% of Indonesians say they pray every day. And then it's Senegal, 2 Muslim countries, and Muslim countries are up towards the top. And the ex-Christian countries towards the bottom, Denmark and those other Scandinavian vacancies, right at the bottom. So when people say, you know, why is Islam in crisis? We point to that. It's not a religion in crisis. Go to your local mosque and it's going to be packed out on Fridays. Go to your local church on a Sunday and you might see, as in my village, half a dozen grey-headed old ladies. And so which religion is in crisis, really? We need to be a little bit more confident. Islam is a success story. Globally, it's a success story, and much of what now purports to be Islamophobia is actually based on envy, because they see in us something that they kind of wish we were ourselves. That's what triggered Vance's conversion. He moved sideways, strangely, into Catholicism. But he was kind of envious of the level of commitment of the Iraqis. In Kentucky, they don't dress like that. They just dress in shorts and go to church, and there's no conception of making a huge sacrifice. He was moved by it. Ramadan, the Hajj, all extraordinarily intact. Last week, the Pope excommunicated 600,000 Catholics because they belong to the Society of St. Pius X, because they want to do the old Mass and worship in the way that Catholics used to worship, and the Pope is saying, no, you have to worship the new way. There's no mosque in the world, I think, where if you go into the mosque, you're going to get a big surprise. I don't think so. It's all the same. We don't have a Pope, but it's all the same. That's a miracle. Dakar to Jakarta, the madhab differences, but it's the same. We underestimate the immensity of that achievement. Nobody's going to be excommunicating anybody for using a guitar from the minbar in the mosque. Not one mosque in the world is doing stuff like that. That's a huge achievement. So my view is that Islam is the great success story, culturally and religiously, of the modern world, and that the hostility and the envy and the exaggeration of small things is based on resentment and a kind of disguised admiration. And we need to reconfigure our sense of browbeaten, kind of underclass mindset in order to be a little bit more confident of Allah's support for us in this time, because Allah's word is always uppermost. Kalimatullahi hiya al-ulya. Despite all the problems of the Muslim Ummah and the rotten regimes and the useless muftis and stories that you all know well, the mosques are still full everywhere, and that, I think, is a presage of future greater success. Who knows where Vance will go when he's finally lost patience with Pope Leo. Not too many places left if you want serious religion based on sacrifice and dignity and modesty and tradition. Where else do you go? So the Holy Prophet as healer, the ulama as the atibba, the physicians of souls, certainly, and that healing continues. And we should approach everything that we do Islamically as a kind of therapeutic exercise rather than a duty that would feel bad if we neglected. We need to embrace these practices. Oh my God, it's July, I have to get up at 3 a.m. in order to say 2 rak'ahs. And no. This is the best thing you're going to do all day. You're going to echo with those beautiful, ancient, resonant words. You're going to be doing something that human beings have been doing for 1,400 years that ties you to the fitrah and ties you to what human beings have always done when the sun and the moon change their positions. You're doing the right thing at that time while everybody else is sleeping it off. And that should be seen as a rare privilege and a delight and as a healing. Rahmatun wa shifa. That's all religion is. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us to reconfigure our intentions to be healers in every sense, and give us the patience and the empathy and the mercy necessary to all of those who, like you, are going to be at the front line of the struggle, not just against cancer, but also against nihilism and against xenophobia and tribalism. Inshallah, I'm confident that all of you will play a very honourable and dignified role in the face of the challenges that lie ahead. Barakallahu feekum, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.